He's not the I got a few votes in the last presidential election at some colleges. It was funny, you know, some kids gave some write-in votes.
Before Stan Lee acquired 4.6 million followers on Instagram,
I have not been working in comics. I've been playing in comics.
before Stan Lee became the undisputed godfather of Marvel,
When I was at Marvel, our whole place was about this big. It's unbelievable.
Well, it's all thanks to you, right?
That's right.
before Stan Lee would be responsible for the co-creation of Spider-Man, the Incredible Hulk, the Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Thor, and the X-Men, before Stan Lee would turn 95 yet continue to cameo in some of the highest earning films of all time.
You know, I guess one person can make a difference.
Stan Lee is essentially the Hugh Hefner of superheroes and the comic book king. He caught widespread attention in the comic book world with his new characters back in the 60s, amassing millions of fans the world over. Now outside of comic books, he has gained mainstream fame with his frequent and hilarious cameos in the Smash Marvel Cinematic Universe. A true icon with an incredible story. So here we go. What's going on, guys? My name is Michael McCrudden, documenting the life and career of Stan Lee prior to fame, here for you on Before They Are Famous. Now we had hundreds of requests to make this video, and there are plenty of stars from the Marvel Universe that we have yet to document. I'm talking Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans, and Scarlett Johansson, and I'm just naming a few. Your job is to let me know who's next. My job is to host this video. Best way to get a hold of me is via Instagram or Twitter. Now let's go. Roll the intro. Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell. Boom! Stan Lee was born Stanley Martin Lieber on December 28, 1922 in New York City, New York.
I'm sorry I can't remember any more about my birth.
His father, Jack Lieber, originally named Hyman, he trained as a tailor and a dress cutter. Celia Lieber, his mother, she was a housewife. Both of Stan's parents were Romanian and part of the 2.7 million Jews who fled America from Europe between 1876 and 1924. Stan's father, Jack, lost his job as a tailor during the Great Depression, and he used the family savings to open up a diner. Sadly, that also failed.
And so he was unemployed most of the time. My earliest memories are just him sitting home reading the want ads in the newspaper.
The family, which also included Stan's younger brother Larry, they moved to a small, cheap apartment in Washington Heights. Their apartment's only window faced a brick wall of another building, and Stan dreamed to be rich enough to afford a view of the street. So that's really all he was looking for. Now one can only imagine what kind of inspiration came from constantly staring at a brick wall. Considering Stan is now estimated to be worth $50 million, I'm sure he's got a much better view. Now with money being so tight at home, Stan's parents pushed him to skip grades so he could get ahead and enter the working world earlier. Stan attended DeWitt Clinton High School and he was a good student, but he had trouble making friends due to being much younger than his classmates.
Unfortunately for me, it was an all-boy high school. It was stupid of me.
He quickly found his love for entertainment through books and trips to the movie theater, and eventually got a job at the Rivoli. This is located on Broadway, and he worked as an usher. Now not only could he see all the movies he wanted, he could also bring home a little money for the family. Now his favorite actor growing up was Errol Flynn, and his favorite film was titled Captain Blood. Let's take a look. Does that look familiar at all? When Stan was 15, he entered a New York Herald Tribune newspaper contest writing about the week's biggest story, and he was given an award. The editor of the Tribune encouraged Stan to become a writer, an idea he decided to run with. While in high school, he took on a part job writing obituaries for the news section of famous people who hadn't yet passed away. Yeah, he quit that job because it was too depressing. You see, kids, you give me a hard time for making Before They Were Gone videos, and mainstream media was writing them before people died, even back in the 30s. In 1939, a family friend got him a job at Timely Comics, which later would become Marvel Comics. The company's main bread and butter was in the publication of pulp fiction and porn magazines, but when these fell out of popularity, the company switched to comics. Stan's job title was to be an all-around gopher for the office and was paid the measly sum of $8 per week. Now I did the math on that with inflation, that's roughly $140. His errands included fetching lunch, keeping inkwells filled, erasing pencil lines, and the likes. Now still a teenager, Stan was fond of playing a flute around the office, which caused legendary artist Jack Kirby to throw things at Stan just out of pure frustration. Back in the 30s, Timely Comics were always trailing National Comics, which would later become DC. Now they had Superman and Aquaman and the likes, so Timely they came up with the Human Torch and Submariner. These two were introduced in the first issue of Marvel Mystery Comics. Now their next big star was Captain America, who made his debut in March of 1941. Stan got his first chance to write for the company in Captain America's third issue. Now the boss liked what he read, and Stan was given the opportunity to write a script for the comic a few issues later.
Who's this to? And here, in the bicentennial year, what better superhero to meet than Marvel's own Captain America?
Finally getting some experience as a writer, Stan decided to use the alias of Stan Lee, just so that in the future, when he was writing more credible work, no one would know it was him. At the time, he thought comics were pretty silly. Now around this time, there were disputes at Timely between Captain America creators Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, who felt like they were getting snubbed on profits, so they decided to leave the company. And this would be the first big fallout of a complicated work relationship between Stan and Jack. Their departure resulted in a new opening for 19-year-old Stan, and he found himself as the editor-in-chief and the art director for the majority of the comics being published. Then in 1942, Stan entered the army during World War II. Now his talents weren't put to waste, with him writing manuals and scripts for training films. He was also commissioned to create a poster encouraging soldiers to have safe sex so they could combat the outbreak of syphilis in Europe.
VD, not me, as he walks in. That was the whole thing. The soldier like that with the dialogue balloon over his head.
Strong and brave, here to save the American way.
Not all of us can storm a beach.
When the war ended, Stan was 23 and moved to the Almanac Hotel in New York, and he returned to work. Upon returning home from the war, Stan hit on a beautiful woman who invited him up to her hotel room, and apparently they hit it off. According to his autobiography, he stated, "The reason I knew we hit it off so well because she didn't ask for payment. It turned out she was a very high-priced lady who was, to put it as gallantly as possible, in business for herself."
She's a hooker.
Stan, you old dog you. Now his bachelor days would soon come to an end when he met Joan Clayton Bucock, a working model who was married, but she was separated at the time. And after dating Stan, she flew to Reno to finalize her divorce. And Stan, he tagged along. Plus she was a babe.
He's the best looking man you've ever seen.
Stan Lee.
On December 5th, 1947, in a ceremony that only lasted 60 seconds, the couple wed. Instead of a honeymoon, they returned to New York and moved to the East Side. 3 years later, he would welcome his first daughter, JC, and another 3 years later, a second child, Jan. Sadly, this one died shortly after birth. Now, doctors told the couple that they should have more children, and they thought about it. They even looked into adoption, but they decided against it. And in his autobiography, he stated, "Looking back, I'm not sure if we made the right decision, but life goes on." By the 60s, Timely Comics was now known as Marvel Comics, and business was at an all-time low. On top of this, Stan Lee was pushing 40, and he had lost his love for working on comic books. He wanted to quit, but his next big creation, it would change absolutely everything.
He said to me, "You know, Stan, I found out that DC Comics has a book called The Justice League, and it's selling pretty well."
Taking inspiration from DC, Stan cooked up the Fantastic Four, and instead of making them invincible Boy Scouts like Superman, he pushed to give them human faults like bad tempers or money problems. Now upon release, the Fantastic Four, they were a smash success. It's smashing time. Is that what he says?
The Fantastic Four is still one of our top-selling books, I should say.
With business on the upward swing and Stan back working with Jack Kirby, the pair cooked up new characters including Spider-Man, the Incredible Hulk, Iron Man, Thor, and the X-Men. Due to Stan having an awful memory, he made the names of many of his superheroes alliterative, and this was in order to recall them better, like, Peter Parker and Sue Storm.
Bruce Banner, Reed Richards, Sue Storm, Stephen Strange, Otto Octavius, Silver Surfer, Peter Parker, and worst of all, J. Jonah Jameson Jr.
In In 1966, Stan introduced the first black superhero in comic book history with the Black Panther. Now Falcon would follow in 1969 and Luke Cage in 1972. The most successful of all the superheroes he created was Teenage Spider-Man, who helped Marvel become the biggest comic book company in America. Stan started using the word Excelsior, which in Latin roughly translates to upwards and onwards to greater glory. And this, well, it would serve as his now famous catchphrase.
Excelsior!
In 1966, Marvel Superheroes premiered as a Saturday morning cartoon. Working on a shoestring budget, the animation was weak and the show flopped after just one season.
Over bounty, find a hunky superhero. Hot to twisted and electrically transistor superhero.
By 1972, Stan had worked his way up to the top job as Marvel's publisher. In 1977, Marvel saw their first major success in television with The Incredible Hulk starring Lou Ferrigno. The show ran for 4 seasons. It was around this time that Stan would take on the iconic role as Mr. Marvel and act as an ambassador to the world of superheroes. Almost like Hugh Hefner, but of the comic book world. In 1983, he posed nude with a comic book, and in 87 he held a public event in which he wed 2 actors dressed as Spider-Man and Mary Jane. In 1988, Ron Perlman took over at Marvel and he tripled Stan Lee's salary and made him the head of Marvel Films to develop movies. Now in 1989, The Punisher was released, following in 1991 Captain America came out, and both went straight to video. They were both under Stan Lee's leadership. Now unfortunately, a lot of Stan's early attempts to have his characters work on other mediums, well, they were duds. Then in the 90s, the comic book bubble, it burst. Total sales of comic books dropped from $1 billion in 93 to less than $450 million in 96. That year, Marvel filed for bankruptcy, but was bought up by Carl Icahn in 97. Now Carl offered Stan a 2-year contract, so Stan sued him, and then he earned himself a lifetime position of Chairman Emeritus. This basically gives him all the honor, but none of the work. Not a bad gig. By 2000, Marvel was making big movies. First was X-Men, then there was Spider-Man in 2002. Daredevil and the Hulk, they came out in 2003. Okay, they didn't do as good, but they all did pretty well. Well, the first 2 they did really well. In 2001, Stan started POW Entertainment to develop movies and television shows based on upcoming superheroes. One of the most popular was Stripperella, voiced by Pamela Anderson. Wait till you see this.
Thanks, Stripperella. That was one hell of a blowjob. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go spank the monkey.
Despite Pamela not being exactly, kid-friendly, well, Walt Disney Company would eventually purchase a 10% stake in the company, putting $2.5 million in Stan's direction. He would also cash in when he sued Marvel for royalties from the Spider-Man films, and they reached a settlement of $10 million. As of 2018, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has produced 18 films, and the series has collectively grossed over $14.7 billion, making it the highest grossing film franchise of all time. Of course, Stan was there to enjoy the fun, making a cameo in each of the films. It's actually a deal he worked into his contract.
Invitation, sir.
I should be on that list.
My name's Michael McCrudden and we make all sorts of bios here on this channel. You guys requested this one. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a long one. See you guys in another video.